There may be a few more people joining in, but I'm actually going to start. First of all, thank you so much. I know there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue, so the fact that you are all here is really quite wonderful. For those who have never seen me on or offline, my name is Gonca Sönmez-Poole, founder of Neighbors in Memory, this little completely voluntary group that is trying to do some good in the world and a little bit of education. And it runs on the kindness of a lot of people who choose to talk to me and sometimes give me ideas. Speaking of kindness of people, 3 people I want to mention just for today's event. Laura and Herman Purutyan, they're not here. They had a conflict, but they did help me reach out to actually Garbis Zakaryan's son in LA. So thank you very much, even if you don't hear me right now, the Purutyans. I also want to acknowledge İhsan Karayazı, who helped me locate Emina Temel in Istanbul because I was trying to find her, and İhsan happened to be in Istanbul. So thank you, İhsan. Now, another very big thank you is going to go to Professor Fatma Müge Göçek from University of Michigan, who, among the many things she's involved in, actually agreed to be with us today as a discussant. So I really can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We are obviously keeping everyone muted unless you are speaking or you are asked to speak or comment on something, because that's how it has to go. As far as questioning, as we had told you in the beginning when we announced the program, we have a full plate of things to discuss. So we're not sure how much time we'll have at the end, but we will be sure to address the questions that were sent in advance. So I just want you to know that we are going to be doing that. But I do encourage everybody. Gina is going to be putting my outreach and events coordinator. She'll put some information up on the chat. So the speakers and discussants emails are there. So after the event, you're welcome to ask any questions or do forward your questions or comments to them, or of course to myself later on, but feel free to use the chat for that reason. Before we go on, just a few words that I want to say why we're holding this event in the first place. I've been actually asked, like, there is a war going on. Yes, we are talking about the risk of World War III, unfortunately, and why, talk about this event. The first thing that comes to mind I want to share with you is the expression historical literacy. I really think that historical literacy is something we can certainly use a lot these days. When I think of Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion, is it possible not to think about repercussions of the 1930s Ukrainian famine instigated by Stalin? Can we actually not think about history as being present as well as in the past? History is happening all the time. When we hear a report, I heard a couple of weeks ago, a Romani family, 6 children, a man called Pavel fleeing Lviv. Is it possible not to think about the fact that Z, apparently the letter Z right now, is some kind of an emblem for Russians' war? But is it possible not to think about the fact that back in World War II, the Z, I learned this from Jud Nirenberg's book, we'll get there. It was a label for Roma and Sinti people used by the Nazi regime. So history is ever present. Now, the other thing is that we do have historical truths, such as the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, Poremos, which is what they called the Roma and Sinti massacres and murders. It means the devouring. However, we also have to acknowledge that there are different ways, variations in the way that people and groups, communities are remembered, honored, profiled, and to come to today's event, written about. And so therefore, we have 2 books about 2 boxers, and the books have very different styles. The content is very different, and yet these 2 people, the people mentioned in the books, have a lot of commonalities. And that is why we are here to talk about those two books and the people who wrote them and why they wrote them. Now, I'm going to introduce Emina Temel, who wrote Garo Neredesin, translated into English as Garo, where are you? Emina Temel was born and raised in Nusaybin, Turkey, where she completed her high school studies. After moving to Istanbul for college, she graduated from the City and Regional Planning Department of Yıldız Technical University and subsequently started working as a town planner for the municipality of Istanbul in 2014. After she got married in 2020, congratulations, she relocated to London, where she now resides. Her first book, Garo Neredesin, by Eton Publishing, came out in 2017 to critical acclaim. And her second book, titled As Solist, it means headliner, was published in 2021. Last but not least, Emina happens to be passionate about boxing, and she actually holds a license as a boxing referee. Now, before I throw it to Emina, what I wanted to say is that in your book, Emina, the one thing that's very obvious is there's a lot of love in the book. Love as far as you being love and kindness and compassion towards your hero, Garbis, but also on the part of, I think, the kind of man Garbis Zakaryan was and how he inspired people, even though he was not a very, very talkative person. And it's, thanks to you that you got to have him talk. So Emina, tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book and what you think about your hero.
Thank you for having me, Gonca, and other attendees. I wish you very good, very lovely day. First of all, I should point out that my decision to write my first novel, Garo Neredesin, in English, Where Have You Been, Garo, was an attempt at developing my intellectual and writing skills, in addition to wanting to express the voices of discriminated groups. As I pursued my interest in boxing, I ended up getting certified as a boxing referee. Around that time, I found out that Garbis Zakaryan was my neighbor in Istanbul. Because of my passion for writing, I decided to contact him and to write about him. As finalizing my book, I came to the realization that I was actually writing more about his deceased wife, Ersilia Lomi, a strong woman standing by a strong man. I was quite impressed by her, a very worldly woman who spoke at least 5 languages. And I remember someone from their community saying that there is no woman alive like Ersilia. In the course of my research and writing, I learned that Garbis Zakaryan taught his children not only the life like so much about boxing, but mostly about humanity. This point was especially interesting to me. I cannot say enough about how happy I was to have met him and write about him. He holds a very special place in my heart. Garbis is the very first hero of my writing career. Actually, I tried to write a biography first. Then later, after I finished it, I realized that it was completely a novel. Not only his passion in boxing sport, but also his love, his family, his friends, his relatives were inevitable roles of his life. His experiences have been teachable and fancies to me and to the readers, by the way. One day he told me about his one flirt in private that was not supposed to be written on a paper. However, I broke the rules and I mentioned that flirt story down. Actually, it wasn't deliberate. I just felt that I had to write that flirt story in that book. He read his life in this book, and he showed his disappointment about the little flirt story in Paris. because he didn't expect me to write on this book. Many days later, he said to me, I can't tell how happy I am about this book. So when is the next book? He asked. Then I took a breath and I was happy about this comment. Meanwhile, he was a perfect husband, a great father, and a magnificent friend. We were a brilliant team when spent time together. Even one day we have been to cinema in Beyoğlu, that of him in his memories. He was very protective, kind, and a real gentleman. We shared unforgettable moments that I just mentioned some of them in the book. And I'm very happy to have met and wrote and spent time with him. It was so special, very important, such irreplaceable memories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing those anecdotes, because I know it takes a bit of research and persistence to get to know somebody and write about them. I'm sure there's going to be a little bit more discussion about his ethnic background and what that means for Turkey and everything else, but we will get to that later. First, I want to go to Jud Nirenberg, who wrote Johann, Trollmann and the resistance and Romani resistance to the Nazis. Jud Nirenberg is a specialist in international human rights and international development. He has held board and managerial roles at a number of nonprofits in the US and overseas, including the US Association for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR, and the Jane Goodall Institute. At George Soros's Open Society Foundations, he directed the world's largest fund supporting Roma civil society in Europe. Later, he served as CEO and later still consultant to the ERTF, the largest federation of Roma community organizations. Nirenberg was elected to a 10-year term as board president of the National Roma Center in North Macedonia in 2011 and continues to sit on its board. He worked on asylum and refugee law at the US Department for Homeland Security. Today, he's a consultant to immigration attorneys and refugees. Nirenberg has lectured widely in Roma issues and also is both an author and editor of books on Romani history and culture. His titles include today's book, Johann, Trollmann and Romani Resistance to the Nazis in 2016, Gypsy Movements in 2015, Gypsy Sexuality in 2011, and Samson's Walls, 2009. He's the 2017 winner of the Romani Baxter Award. Before we listen to you, Jud, I do want to just mention one thing. Obviously, I read your book with great interest and took a lot of notes. And I think one thing that jumped out at me was your desire to put forth the idea that Johann Trollmann, who was born Rukeli by the Sinti name, was both a resistor and a victim, and that those two are not always irreconcilable. And that's one of the points that I got coming through your book. And I'd like to hear more from it. Why you wrote the book, what you think about it. Please tell us.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm looking at who's here, and I'm not seeing people who I presume have any background with Roma history or who the Roma are. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to mention that before I say why I wrote the book. Yeah. Roma are the largest ethnic minority in the European Union. There are more Roma in the EU than Arabs or Turks or sub-Saharan Africans or any other ethnic minority. This is probably about to change because so many Syrians have arrived in the last few years in Europe. If they're having children, I think Roma may find that we're no longer the largest minority, but so far we still are. And more to the point, Roma are the ethnic minority in Europe that in most polls are the most disliked minority in the EU. Europeans are more willing to express an open disliking of Roma than how they feel about blacks, Muslims, Arabs, or gays or Jews. Roma are the one ethnic group that Europeans are not embarrassed to discriminate against. In Britain, surveys to see what ethnic slurs British people use on the internet have found that when Britons use pejorative language on the internet, their most common words are anti-Roma slurs. If you're sitting there wondering, why haven't I heard of this group? A word that we don't like, but that is used very much is gypsy, or in Turkish çingene, or in Russian tsigan. There is no Roma country. We're everywhere, but the largest Roma communities now are Romania, Bulgaria, Macedonia, and in parts of Central Europe like Hungary. Despite the stereotype, the truth is that only a very, very, very small minority of Roma are nomadic or live in some kind of mobile home community. I don't mean that things have changed and we don't do it anymore. I mean that was never true. 200 years ago, 300 years ago, only a very small minority of the Roma were ever nomads, or at least by choice. Although it is true that over and over again in history, Roma have been unfortunately going through migration waves. And so there have always been lots of Roma refugees and immigrants. Roma were slaves in Southeastern Europe until the 1860s. So the end of Roma slavery came just a couple of years before the end of slavery in the US. Roma, together with Jews, were selected in Germany by the fascists for complete genocide, not just in Germany, but in all the fascist countries, almost all the fascist countries in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. The effort was not so unsuccessful. A very high percentage of Roma did die at that time before fascism was stopped. In communism, the official language preached equality for all, but the reality is that in communist countries, Roma were in segregated housing and neighborhoods. They were given different treatment in the allocation of jobs. And after 1989, in the countries where the most Roma live, Roma have continued right up until now to be in segregated education. It's rare for Roma in Europe to even finish high school, secondary school, because they're in segregated schools and classrooms and they tend to just quit. They're segregated today in the housing market and face discrimination in the labor market, in public hospitals. A lot of public hospitals either won't serve Roma or will serve them in a segregated area. None of this is legal. All the European countries have similar anti-discrimination laws, but it is the norm in practice. So about Trollmann, when the Nazis took over power in Germany, they took control of sports, and they decided that there would be no more Jews in boxing. Eventually, they would decide that Jews could not be in any sports, but first they decided no more Jews in boxing. Germany did have a Jewish boxing champion, and so when he was thrown out of the sport, and also, by the way, thrown out of the country, the national boxing title was open, and Johann Trollmann competed for it and became the national champion. He became the national champion on a Friday night. The Nazi sport authorities couldn't believe that they had made this mistake. They realized when we said no more Jews, we should have said no more Jews or other disgusting minorities. So Johann Trollmann was the national champion until their offices opened on Monday. And then they declared the fight a no decision and they took away his title. He had, so why did I write the book? Roma are usually written about especially by non-Roma, in terms of what European countries and what majority communities have done to us. And I wanted a history book that shows not what Roma have done to us, but what the Roma are doing as actors, not as passive people. The book has to be a little bit about what the Nazis and the fascists did to Roma, because that's unavoidable context. But mainly the book is about Roma, not just Johann Trollmann, but a lot of different Roma did to fight back against Nazism, against discrimination. There were a lot of unknown stories about Roma as protesters and rights advocates, partisans, soldiers, and more, risking their lives and standing up for something. I think for Roma who are writing about history, or even very, very recent history, there's a challenge, which is how to write about things like genocide or victimization, but also writing about us, about our contributions to European culture and history or world history, not just what we've survived, but how we've impacted the bigger world. There are some challenges in a book like this. One is that if you're trying to write for as many people as possible, then you want to explain things about the Roma that outsiders don't know, but you also recognize that a lot of your readers are going to be Roma, or at least they're going to be people who are very involved, who know a lot about Roma already. So there's a challenge to have enough background without making it just a drag for readers who are already insiders. I tried to include a lot of information that the average Roma would not already know about our own history. Another big challenge with this book is that it's a book that's largely about boxing, but who's going to read this kind of book, or who do I want to read this kind of book? Well, it's not mainly for boxing fans, and it's not primarily for men. So how do you make sure that people who aren't interested in boxing, or people who are not interested in macho topics, how do you make sure that a woman reader with no interest in fight sports is going to relate to the topic? And in my case, this meant that there was information included about a lot of other Roma, not just Trollmann, who fought against Nazis. There were a lot of Roma women who were risking their lives fighting against the enemy. This was sort of a lost story. It also means that even when I was writing about boxing, I could find the words of woman writers who had covered related topics, who had covered the boxing world, even finding quotes of women fighters. I didn't find any Roma women who were professional fighters, but that's not quite the point. So, in the end, it's about the question for me is how do we write about a population that has been that has suffered through so much, without just writing about getting knocked down, but writing about what people in that community have done, have given to the world. I'll finish this comment, but Gonca, you asked what made me decide to write the book. I had been giving a book talk about a different book that I had written in New York, about very, very modern history, about the history of Roma politics after 1990. And a man in the audience stood up to ask a question, not a Roma man, but he said, well, how do you get us people who are not Roma to be interested in your history? Because people like to read history about heroes, and you have no heroes because you fought no wars. And I thought that question was amazing, because it says so many ridiculously untrue things. It says that the Roma have never had to fight in a war, when I'm sure Roma have fought in every European war. We're citizens all over Europe. Right now, there are lots of Roma fighting and dying in Ukraine. And Johann Trollmann fought in the war. The other thing is, there's this issue that the only kind of hero in the world is a battlefield hero. And so I wanted to challenge both of those ideas. I wanted to show that Roma have fought bravely in war, but also to show that there are lots of other kinds of courage, and hopefully succeeded. But let me stop talking for a minute.
Thank you so much, Jud. But a couple of things before we go any further. You are correct that most people reading your book would probably already know something about the Roma. However, like myself, because I did a lot of work years ago for television and otherwise about the Roma, and I learned a lot from you, I remember. However, I did not know about a boxer from that time. I did not know anything about it, and I certainly, most of the books that I had written, that I had read when I was researching Roma years ago, would be more like Isabel Fonseca's book, like Bury Me Standing, which is an excellent book. But what you did with your book is very, very different. So thank you for writing it. Before we start to hear Professor Göçek, I do want to stay true to what we said. So I'm going to have Gina read the first two questions that came to us. And then we will go from there. I'll have Gina read the question, and then we can address it. Let me just make a point. The first one is going to be more about Emina's book, and Emina can certainly answer. However, we do have, I believe, both sons. Checking the participant list. One son is in LA, one son of Garbis Zakaryan from LA, Arto Zakaryan, and the other one is in Istanbul. We're covering all kinds of, time differences, which is great. So Kaspar or Arto also can unmute themselves and answer if they have something to say about this first question. Okay, go ahead, Gina.
Thank you, Gonca. Our first question is from Harry Parsekian, who asks, is it common practice in Turkey that caskets are draped with the Turkish flag?
Well, one thing I know, but then Emina or whoever wants to jump in, I suppose Garbis Zakaryan was a national athlete, and therefore that's what happened. But there may be some more to that story. And so either Emina or one of the sons, feel free to jump in, please, and tell us a little bit more about that. Emina, you want to unmute yourself and say a few words?
Okay. Let me answer. He is the first professional national boxer in Turkey, and he has been like a teacher for Cemal Kamacı, who has been European championship in Turkey. And can I listen to the question?
Sure, yes. The question is it common practice in Turkey that caskets are draped with the Turkish flag?
Is it possible that Arto or Kaspar have something to say about this point? Because I know it was in the papers in Turkey and there is something behind it. But if there isn't, we can just skip it. Emina, Arto, or Kaspar? Or anyone else who wants to say something, and for that matter, that's also welcome. Maybe Professor Göçek has something to say.
I would, but I would say something until if Kaspar or Arto sort of step in, because obviously they know the answer. But in general, the flag has been always draped about when those citizens have basically performed or activities in the public sphere that the Turkish state ceremonially recognizes. It so happens, of course, that what makes this very exceptional is that usually, because in Turkey the dominant group are like me, white Turks, who are ethnically Turkish and Muslim and such. Of course, this is an exception in the sense that you have a non-Muslim, and that's what makes it sort of different and dramatic, because he is being sort of publicly recognized in a way that wouldn't have been possible now, for example, these days when ethnicity and citizenship are much more exclusionary. So if you're Kurdish or Armenian or anybody who's considered a minority in Turkey, you would not be included. Kaspar?
Yes, I want to say something. Normally, if you are a national athlete, then it's the normal way that you're in your funeral, there will be a flag. Or if you are a popular or well-known person, a photographer, Ara Güler, was also died in 2001, I think. There was also the flag in his funeral. But the problem was that my father couldn't believe that they will do this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kaspar. So it was almost his wish, and it did actually come true after he passed because he was so valuable and revered. Thank you very much for that. And unless someone else wants to say something, I will go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add something. That he is a professional boxer of Turkey, and he has been in a funeral of his friend. He saw crowded people, and he says to the next friend, he says, would I be wrapped in Turkish flag, and will they say me goodbye, such as this crowded? And they were smiling to each other. Actually, it was a wish of how I say, like, frankly, like is feeling of discriminated groups, because many years later nobody knocks his door, even he is a first professional boxer in Turkey, and that's why it has announcement in newspapers, and that made me in shock when I read that announcement, and I started to write about his life in book.
Thank you for adding that.
I have a small question. Emina, sorry, could you explain what it means to say that he was the first professional? I've heard you say this before. What does it mean to say he was the first professional boxer in Turkey? I assume the person fighting against him in the ring was also being paid. So I don't know in a sport with two people how it's possible to.
The state wasn't in any boxing.
Oh, they were not participating at the time? They were not actually sending?
It was the first time when he participated to boxing, and then he got the label professional. After his time, he been a professional boxer.
That years, there was no professional license for boxing in Turkey. My father, father took it.
He was the first to receive the license.
Yes, and he took it from Argentina, not from Turkey.
Ah. Wow.
That explains it. And before we go to the next question, I do have to say that I guess speaking to some other people who may not even be in the participant list here, some would say, some maybe Armenians and other minorities from Turkey, that maybe what mattered most is how they were treated before they passed and not so much after, because I've heard that being said. Let us go to the next question, please. Gina, read it.
Yes, thank you. So this question comes from Nina Bo, and it is that there had been some news a couple of years ago about a rail line that would have endangered the memorial for Roma and Sinti in Berlin. Has that issue been resolved, especially since the memorial took a very long time to be erected in the first place?
No, actually, that's sort of an ongoing question of what'll eventually happen there. So there was finally, in this century, in the 21st century, there was a memorial built in Berlin to remember Roma who died in the Nazi concentration camps. And this was something that Roma had been asking for since the early 1980s. And it was a long battle to get this. At this point in Germany, when the Holocaust is taught, there's at least a little bit taught about what happened to the Roma, but it's been a slow, long battle. This memorial is not the only place in Europe where you can see at least some kind of small memorial on the site of where Roma died, or on the site of where Roma were put in trains and sent, for example, to Auschwitz, or where Roma fought where Roma gathered as partisans. There are some other small memorial spots around Europe, but the one in Berlin is the most important, I would say, and definitely the biggest. And it is at risk of being torn down to make room for a Deutsche Bahn project. No, we're still going to see what happens with that. There's still a controversy on that one. And there's a larger controversy across Europe about in countries where the most Roma live, how much or how little about Roma history is included in education. My fear is that I wouldn't like that education to completely center on the years 1939 and 1945. That is not the most important moment in Roma history in my mind. And so while it would be good if people knew about what happened at that moment, what's most important for a non-Roma child, or even a Roma child growing up in Romania or France, to know about the history of the Roma is not just something that happened in 1944, especially because then people can say, well, my society had nothing to do with that. We were invaded by the Germans. The Germans did this. And that's not, there's just no lesson learned from that.
Thank you, Jud. I have several other questions I could ask, but I'm not going to, because I want to go to Professor Müge Göçek. Let me give a little introduction, and it's going to be short, even though her bio could go on. So Professor Fatma Müge Göçek is a professor of sociology and women's studies at University of Michigan. Her research focuses on the comparative analysis of history, politics, and gender in the first and third worlds. She critically analyzes the impact of processes such as development, nationalism, religious movements, and collective violence on minorities. Her published works include, and this is a shortened version of everything she has worked on, Denial of Violence, Ottoman Past, Turkish Present, and the Collective Violence Against the Armenians, 1789 to 2009, by Oxford University Press, 2014. The Transformation of Turkey, Redefining State and Society from the Ottoman Empire to the Modern Era, from IB Tauris Publishers in 2011. Rise of the Bourgeoisie, Demise of Empire, Ottoman Westernization and Social Change, Oxford University Press, 1996. East Encounters West, France and the Ottoman Empire in the 18th Century, Oxford University Press in 1987. And Professor Göçek is currently working on a theory book right now, Constructing Social Theory from the Vantage Point of Minorities. So Professor Göçek, please give us a little bit of your comments and thoughts on the subject overall. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Gonca, for preparing this. What I like about it is, of course, that you are not only, looking at how communities form, or diaspora community, in this case, form in the United States regarding minorities, people who had been minorities in other contexts, and how, they participate in the public sphere. So in a way, in terms of social actors, if you think about the past and the present, there are, of course, these two boxers that these two authors have brought forward. That's the past is these sort of two social actors as boxer, and the present, of course, is Emina, Temel, and Jud Nirenberg, who have then given voice and agency to them by writing books about them. So that's the second layer. And of course, you, in a way, have now created a third layer where you have had this community, and you and Gina, where we can discuss these. So those are sort of sociologically the three levels of what happened in the past, how that was interpreted in the present by our two authors, and how you as a journalist then put this sort of within the diaspora context. So those are sort of the three levels I would emphasize. The other thing that's very important, I was thinking about, what is similar and what's different about these boxers when you think about them and the way they have been presented. What is important, of course, in both contexts, you are, in a way, demonstrating prejudice and discrimination in two separate societies, one the Ottoman one, the other, of course, specifically the German, but I would say European, because of the prejudice and discrimination against the Roma throughout Europe, as well as, by the way, the Ottoman Empire and such, because that also continued. So the difference, the othering of the Roma have been there historically much longer than the othering of other groups that, of course, all escalated because of nationalism, especially the notion of equality, liberty, and sort of brotherhood. It's not surprising, of course, that those that are seen as different were not made a part of the nation state of sort of the body politic, the modern body politic, and therefore faced prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice obviously entails sort of views about others. Discrimination is when you put those views in action. So legally, it's usually the discrimination that people take issue with and study. And in this case, of course, what happened in both contexts is the discrimination and destruction of a minority group, both in the Holocaust, of course, and in the Armenian genocide. And there, temporarily, there's a difference in the sense that, of course, Zakaryan is sort of refers to the period of what is seen as kılıç artı, the sort of remnants of the sword, remnants of the sword, basically, of destruction of Turks against Armenians. And what happens to Armenians who then live with their perpetrators in the Turkish Republic. And we're very lucky, actually, to have Lana Ekmekçioğlu with us, who's a professor at MIT, who does work on and has very important studies of Armenian life in the Turkish Republic in the aftermath of the genocide, and she would know this much more than I do. So maybe you can also allow her to say a few things, because she knows much more about this than I do. Comparatively speaking, about the Roma, of course, they had, as Jud Nirenberg has said, they have faced discrimination from literally the Middle Ages onwards. So historically, they have always been seen as the other, probably more than others, because of the mobility they have, and they, as they sort of travel throughout and never sort of stay geographically in one place, and as a consequence are not fully controlled by the state. And because of that, I think they have faced discrimination and violence, and unfortunately those patterns continued not only during the imperial period throughout European and Ottoman history, but also at present. So that is another aspect I would focus on. With respect to what's interesting, of course, is that both of them and their presence in boxing also sort of is special, because minorities are usually, and I define minority as any social group that doesn't basically participate fully and equally in society along with other social groups. So anyone like women, children, minorities, and others are all sort of in that category. And what is, of course, very important in these cases is that another way to define minorities is by making sure that they are kept out of the public sphere. And that is why it is the public sphere sort of being acknowledged publicly like a national hero. I mean, you know, that is very far and few in between, especially when it comes to minorities. It gets silenced. If you look at, for example, Ottoman and Turkish history, which I know very well, I mean, much better than the Roma, I'm sorry, is that whenever there are attempts for minorities to get into the public sphere, they are silenced. There are exceptions to this because sports is one of the ways in which you can break into the public sphere because of the physical prowess you have. And there, of course, the ethnic discrimination that you face doesn't work as well. And as a consequence, you are able to enter and you become sort of exception in the sense that you're not supposed to be there, but you have ended there because you are physically doing something that others are not able to. And that is the irony of the situation, in the sense that you are a national hero in a country that defines nationalism increasingly by one's ethnicity, religion, and such. And that's what makes Zakaryan's presence in this public sphere, or the draping of him in the sort of Turkish flag, so unique and different. So this is an exception, I would argue, and Lana could probably tell us more about the larger context within which how this happens as well, because it's a fleeting belonging to the national heroic or the public sphere. In a way, it doesn't work in others. And what makes, of course, the Roma experience very pungent is that, you also see in that case physical prowess that leads to a public presence, but one, of course, that the Nazis never tolerated, or the fascists in Europe in general, and therefore resorted to violence to destroy that presence by physically destroying that. Had Zakaryan unfortunately lived much earlier, he probably, during the genocide, he probably would have faced the same outcome. But we're talking, as I said, about the next generation. and therefore nation states exclude then sort of these minorities from the public sphere. They can't do it openly by physically destroying them through violence, but they do it through silencing that presence. And that is why, what was most controversial about Zakaryan's presence, as his son said, is the fact that, how could you negotiate this minority being present in the public sphere when they are not supposed to be there symbolically because they don't fit the profile. That's, I think, a tension that also demonstrates to us the racism that exists in Turkey, unfortunately. Racism which naturalizes and normalizes the fact that people like me, white Turks, Muslims, Hanafi, Muslims, Sunni Muslims, are the ones who dominate the public sphere more and more these days than they did, and exclude others, in this case, in the past, Greeks, Jews, and Armenians, and of course, in the present, and all through the Kurds. So that would be the dynamic within which I would at least interpret what's been going on, and I'll stop there so that people can ask questions, or you can maybe give Lana a voice too. Thank you.
Thank you for those excellent comments. Thank you very much. I just wrote something in the chat. Professor Lerna Ekmekçioğlu, whom I admire and have read her work, unfortunately is on a listening only mode right now. Being a mother of two young girls, she's doing several things at once. However, please reach out to her. Her personal email is on the chat, and you can find the MIT email where she teaches by just going to the MIT website. But thank you very much, Professor Göçek. Now, if Professor Göçek, do you have anything specific you would like to ask of our speakers? If you do, please go ahead.
Yes, I do. What is very important for me is how your identities, because we all have a multiplicity of identities, and obviously, Lerna's as a mother sort of prevented her from participating in the public sphere, which often happens to women. So I have to, talk about that too. But what I'm very curious about your own personal identities, public identities, and how they intersect or do not with your basic heroes, let's say, in both cases. That's what I'm interested in, because that's how narratives or these ideas develop initially. As your identity as authors, or your particular aspect of your identity leads all of us to choose some topics to work on, some people to emphasize as opposed to others. That's what I'd like to know.
Jud, do you want to go, or Emina? One of you jump in.
I'll be glad to go, but Emina, why don't you go first?
As identity, I want to add a point. One day when I asked a question about genocide or fairness or discrimination identity to the Garbis Zakaryan, he never commented ever, and he was always joking to me, you don't say. But once I saw that he was angry with a friend, a manager actually, who has said, let's change your name instead of Garbis Zakaryan to Garbis Zakaryan. He was angry with that comment, but anyway, I realized that he was a piece of Istanbul. He was Turkey, because he felt that he is a part of a Turkish culture, actually, because I said, did you have any chance, if you had chance, would you go to abroad to live a new life? He said, I had many chances, but I never prefer to go abroad. I just stay here and I live my life. And yeah, I was surprised.
But that is just so that sort of, it's interesting, that is not at all uncommon. I mean, I have had unfortunate similar conversations with Hrant Dink before his murder. And I asked, because then the Armenians of, especially the United States had realized that the sort of threat against him in the public sphere had increased dramatically. And they wanted me to ask him if he and his family would like to come and live here in the United States. And I talked to him and he said, no. He said, this is my country. I belong here. This is where my ancestors lived. If you take me out of this, it will be like if I'll be a fish out of water. That's why I have to stay here. And of course, as you probably know, because of the injustice, legal injustice that was done, it was his decision to leave eventually after he took the issue to the European Court, and he said when he's leaving, he will follow symbolically the caravan routes out of Turkey. One thing, of course, he didn't get to do because he was murdered. So I think that's also important. But Emina, what is it about you? Where do you come from? How does your identity as being a woman, or your identity within Turkish society, I mean, how does that impact you? That's why I sort of told you how my identity I learned critically to question my identity within that context, to understand the location of minorities better.
Thank you, Müge, because I was going to say clarify, because your question really was more asking the authors to comment how their own identities actually work in the work that they do. But
as a woman, as a Kurdish, and as a Muslim, if I say, I had in many conversations, when they ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Mardin. It's a city in the southeast of Turkey. And they reply, oh, okay, we are all human. And I just stay in my place. I say, okay, what do you need to say that? I mean, I know I'm human. And in economical statute, in work places, when you work as a woman, I speak, when you work, you come to face many problems, but firstly they prefer men, because women can give a birth or can take maternal permissions. And I saw many problems, but what else we can do? I mean, we just make disadvantages to advantages. And now I'm in London because I relocated and I reunited with my husband. And they say, okay, you're in Britain, you're gonna be a British. I say, that's not my goal. As a writer, I want to be a global citizen. Enough. I'm not woman. I'm not Kurdish. I'm not Muslim. I'm more than these identify classes.
I have to just clarify one thing, because it's important for the audience to understand what they mean when you say you're from Mardin, which is Nusaybin, right? And you say you're from there. The reason why they're saying, oh, well, we're all human, it's almost like the point is that that's pejorative. That's like, oh, that's too bad, but we're all human anyway. That's a very Turkish way to address that. And maybe Jud has something to say about that, because I thought I'd clarify it, because the nuance is very important. It's like, but okay. That's the point. Jud, go ahead. Tell us about yourself.
Well, so on the simplest level, I came to the Trollmann story because I'm Roma. I'm half Roma, and worked in the Roma civil rights movement for a long time. I would also point out I'm half Roma and I'm half Jewish. A difficulty that Roma activists have had with getting more attention to what happened to Roma under Nazism. Some Roma activists would say that part of the problem is that the most important people in the world of Holocaust education and Holocaust museums and public memory, they treat the Holocaust as property. If you'll check an English dictionary, the Holocaust with a big H is not about the Nazis killing minorities. It's specifically about the Nazi genocide of the Jews. The Holocaust does not refer to the Roma. It refers to the Jews only. And so I found myself being very careful with the book. I knew that I wanted in the last couple of chapters to write about the very recent history of Roma activists fighting for more memory of the Roma genocide. I also wanted to make sure that I respected the criticism that Jewish Holocaust scholars have. When you write about the other minorities that died, you lose the big picture. The Nazis were obsessed with us. They weren't obsessed with you. They were obsessed with us. And I tried to in the book both give the big context to show how central anti-Semitism was to Nazi race policy, how in some ways Trollmann and the Roma were suffering an expansion of what started with Jews, but also to really focus on this possible, this accusation that Roma can't get our story told at the Holocaust Museum because the Jews who run the Holocaust Museum don't want us there. And I think that is true. I think that's absolutely happening. And I think there were real concrete examples in the book, in interviews, of people saying, look, this is, that fear is real among the leaders of Holocaust education. There is a willingness at the big Holocaust education centers to have a special event once a year about Armenians. But that's because it's happening on a different continent. It's completely separate from what happened with the Nazis. But they're very hesitant, and they're very willing to have a once a year an event about Darfur, for example, or other contemporary genocides. But to talk about people who were victims of attempted genocide in Europe in the 40s, there can be there's a real fear there that the story is going to get confused. But I don't know if I took it away from my personal identity and what it has to do with all this. But yeah, obviously this was the book is a way for me to explore issues that directly relate to me. By the way, I grew up, Gonca knows this, I grew up in the US being told we don't ever tell anyone that we are gypsies. It's for us to know inside the house. Our neighbors don't know. There's no way for them to figure it out. Our family name doesn't wave a gypsy sign. Our skin is light. No one's going to know until you tell them, so just don't. And I never broke that rule until I moved out of my home and went to university at the age of 18. Gonca and I met when she was working for a Boston area TV program.
Yes, for Chronicle. Let me just tell you one thing.
This was terrific to my father. I came out on TV in his area, in the Boston area. Friends of his saw it. He'd been hiding his identity his whole life, and without asking him, I did this. It was a big deal.
Yes. yes, it was great for me to meet you at that time. This was many, many years ago. But as far as how insular they need to be, and they don't tell anyone. When I did the production for Channel 5 here, I actually had to do some tricks of production. There was a bunch of Romani people who frequented this very special church in Revere, I believe, and we had to go there, and I worked on it so much, but my convincing skills did not work on the Roma community. They would not show up. So we had to make some tricks and use the empty pews to show that the Romani people actually came here to pray. So that is true. Now, everything you told us about the resistance from the U.S. Holocaust Museum even and everything was going to be a question from me. So you already covered that. I can go to the next question, but I do want to make a point that, yes, there are some unbelievable parts. Page 162 in your book, somebody from the Jewish community involved in the museum actually was upset. He's quoted as saying, for the Romani community, they're stealing the Holocaust from us. It's a direct quote, and it's in your book. And that's the extent of some of the challenges faced by the Roma and Sinti people. I
came to see in my research for those chapters of the book, and I knew all the people involved. I had for a long time known the Roma who were the most active with this and who were briefly on the board of directors of that museum. And so I came to the research already thinking that there is a Jewish conspiracy to keep the Roma out of the museums and the monuments and out of Holocaust education. I changed my mind a little bit while doing the research because I came to see that there are two things happening. On the one hand, there are people trying to keep Roma out and there are people who don't want the story told. On the other hand, there's a complete incompetence among the Roma history activists where they don't understand at all the sensitivities of the Jewish experts that they're working with. And they're not willing to learn how to work around that. And in fact, most of the time, they're not historians and they don't quite know the subject matter and they're not bothering to learn it. And so they say untrue things and it hurts us. And so there are also a bunch of stories in that book about some really funny but sad moments of incompetence where someone who is supposed to be the Roma genocide expert gets up and says something absolutely incorrect and stupid and embarrassing. And it turns a whole room full of Jewish historians against the Roma suffering because it's hard to take us seriously when our experts don't really know anything. They've written books with no footnotes, books with no bibliographies. They're very poorly informed. But anyway.
I would just want to point out that one of my colleagues here is Ronald Grigor Suni, who also works on these issues. And prior to the Roma, he had a research term at the Holocaust Museum himself. And he initially wanted to introduce the Armenian genocide to the Holocaust Museum. And he also faced a lot of resistance, just like you did. And in his case, there were, of course, Armenians who supported the inclusion of the Armenian genocide at the Holocaust Museum. But there was also the Turkish state who was totally against that public acknowledgement. And wanted to silence that participation. So that is why they put a lot of pressure on the Holocaust Museum. And that is why the Jews, especially Jews of Turkey, have always sort of come on the side. They were forced to come on the side of the Turkish state with respect to acknowledging the Armenian genocide because of the small but significant Jewish community living in Turkey who are sort of seen by the Turkish state, unfortunately, and its governments as sort of captives in negotiating Turkish policy, in relation to the minorities. And that you probably know also is what happened to Jews in the case of the Holocaust, how their legal position changed, as Hannah Arendt said, how their collective protection changed, and they were made into citizens, and once they were made into individual citizens, then the state could go after them one by one and destroy them, which is what happened. But you are all right also in pointing out that there was a lot of resistance by Jewish historians, because they thought the Holocaust against, let's say, the Shoah, I think the Shoah is a better term, the Shoah was at a scale so high that they were afraid the violence in it would be relativized when you compared it with other genocides. But I think that if you critically do that comparison, you can also point out how the Shoah was similar to or different from the prejudice and discrimination faced during the Shoah or the Holocaust by obviously homosexuals, political dissidents, religious leaders, communists, and others who were also destroyed during, let's say, the Holocaust of all these groups, in addition to the Jews. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to see if, because I'm getting just a couple of people who want to know about if there's any room. I'm actually going to see if we only have like 14 minutes left, and we do have to stop at 12:30, but somebody wants to know if there's time. So I'm going to see if Tanya Bertavyan, I believe, is asking if there is time to ask a question. Tanya, can you unmute yourself and go for your question?
Yeah, thank you. It's actually not a question. I just, well, maybe. I wanted to add some observations. Like Professor Göçek already pointed out, the difference that Garbis Zakaryan heroism was not during the World War I. So if it had been during the genocide, it might not be the same situation. About being made heroes in Turkey, if you are you're a Christian minority. I think when you're an athlete, you score points, so it is like measurable kind of accomplishment. Whereas if you are an artist or a scientist who is making contributions on an ongoing basis and along with others, and especially in the arts, it's not a measurable quantity. It might be a little harder. Although there have been artists that have been recognized as heroes, like Ara Güler, and I think also Sirvat Karamanov.
Tanya, it would be so helpful. Can you ask a question just in case somebody else wants to ask something? Is it possible that you ask the question?
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I am disappointed that I can't express my views as someone who is Turkish Armenian and knows a lot about this as well.
No, I will come back to you unless there's no one else who wants to ask a question or do a comment. Let's just make sure, with the time I have. Okay, there are no more questions. Tanya, if you wanted to make another comment, please come in.
Yes, I wanted to point out that when the Roma are another difference between the two situations is that Armenians, being indigenous people of Anatolia, and pretty much truly having the same customs and same, or not same, but similar customs, and also appearances as the rest of the Turkish population. At the social level, it is a different kind of relationship than experiencing prejudice as being somebody who looks different. So that may be another reason for more of a fraternity at the social level, while at the political level things aren't that good at all. And this also may relate to how it is true that it is difficult to belong to Turkey. And in fact, I don't think we should be called Kılıç Artı anymore, even though that is a term that people have been using. To belong to Turkey, both in terms of the society and in terms of where one is born and where ancestors are born, and yet not be treated equally and have to emigrate, or not choose to emigrate, but be oppressed. That's a very real situation right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to give one last word to either one of Garbis Zakaryan's sons. Obviously, as Tanya mentioned, they are Armenian citizens of Turkey, and maybe they have something else to say. There's only a few minutes, so I'm not going to go into my specific questions. The way I would ask if they have something to say is, I've heard Kaspar especially being interviewed about his dad, and he always talks about his dad taught them to be humans, first of all, more than just boxing, like Emina said, but also that he actually taught them without saying too many things. He also said that he taught them how not to ask anything of anyone, to stand tall. So I just want to ask if there was any incidents that they knew their dad had issues with the challenges that he faced as a minority person, but that he did not say or wanted to not talk about it. Can one of you maybe answer that question? If they're there, let me see.
If Arto will speak, then I'm waiting, okay?
This is how I'd like to
As
answer.
far as the issues goes, I think prejudice is everywhere in the world, even in the United States. We're foreigners, right? So I think if you let yourself be discriminated, you will be discriminated. But if you don't let it bother you, and if you believe that you belong there and you act like you belong there, nobody can take that away from you. Am I right? Or does it make sense to you? Yes, of course, we all have issues. I live in the United States 40 years. I face issues here because I'm a foreigner. Anybody says that, no, it doesn't exist, they're lying to us. Same thing in Turkey too. Yeah, did we have challenges? Of course we had challenges. I wanted to go to military school. They wouldn't let me in. Did I give up? No, I just went to military and served as like anybody else. I enjoyed my time over there. I made many good friends. And if anybody had challenged me, I just said, okay, let's sit down and talk. What's the problem? And when we finished talking, we became very good friends. So if we don't speak our mind in one-on-one, or, you know, some people one-on-one, or some people like ranting to many, many people, I think we won't have any problems. But of course, it's issues everywhere. And we were never taught that we don't belong there.
Well, I mean, you make a very good point, obviously, but, you know, there is a very significant difference in the sense you can, of course, be in the public sphere, but, you know, are you there by choice or are you forced out of it? That is what's important.
No,
I mean,
I was not forced out of it.
Yes.
I came here to get married. Things didn't work. It's a different story. And it was my pride who made me stay here. Would I go back there and live there? Honestly, if I didn't have my son that he was born here, I would have gone 10 years ago. 16 years ago, if I had a problem, I would go back live there. I have everything there. What do I have here? Do you have any good friends?
You do have
We all
good
have
friends
fake
here,
friends
no?
here. We don't have good friends. Our friendships are made over there. I still talk to my friends that I went to elementary school. When I go back there, it's like we're all 11, 12 years old, but we cannot do that here.
Yeah.
I have my friends from Turkey here. I cannot even see them. Why? We don't have time. But over there, we make time.
True.
So that's my take. I don't know what Kaspar thinks, but
You have something to add, Kaspar? What Arto is saying is actually very similar to comments that from a lot of my Istanbul Armenian friends around here that I hear. There is a lot of love from the land that they come from.
I'm in Istanbul. I was always in Istanbul. My father was in Istanbul. And so I'm not thinking similar to my brother. But if you think in Turkey, if you are living in Turkey, and if we are all Turks. You said they are Armenian at the beginning of this your last speech. We are Turkish. We are Turkish. We are Armenian original ethnicity, but we are all Turkish. But people are asking us, where are you from? What is Armenian? So, and the most important word used there is olsun. It's never mind. If you belong to a minority, also for Emina, and the people meet you, know you, love you, like you, and they see that you are like them. We are also living in Anatolia. My family is coming from Bitlis. My mother is Italian. That part is coming from Italy, but my father's family comes from Bitlis. They were a very crowded family, but we have no. They came to Istanbul. They were only 5 or 6 people. They lived something, but my father never told us. They never speak about this because he wanted to live in Turkey like Turkish people. He was a Turkish man. And in this period, I always think, what wanted my father, and what was his, what would he prefer? So, and I speak and I do this during his funeral. My private opinion is sometimes different, but my father lived as a Turkish man. He had to live very carefully. He never visited Armenia because he was a Turkish boxer. At that time, it was very dangerous to go there. He lived he had many problems, but he never told us. Also, when he was very old, I know some things, but not too much, only 1 or 2 things, because it was I was born in 1960. At that time, in families, this was not spoken. It was taboo. Now there are people are now speaking. Everybody is more talented. But I lived in Turkey. I'm a doctor. I teach in some universities. I worked as a general manager in an insurance company. I had never problems because I lived also like my brother. We could always talk to everybody. I'm an Armenian. Yes, we had problems. Our family lived a genocide, but they lived it. I don't live. My father was born in Istanbul. I'm also living in Istanbul. So I want to live in Turkey. I also had the chance. I studied in the German school. I could also go to Germany or to France or to USA. My brother was always there, but I never preferred this. I lived always in Turkey. My wife is Turkish and Muslim, but we both are atheists, so we have no problems. Also, we have problems in Turkey, but we are living here. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that is a very good place to end. And I like the fact that we were able to hear from Garbis Zakaryan's 2 sons. That was really, really valuable for us. I am so very thankful to Emina and Jud for being here. I really think that we had a fruitful conversation. I hope. This was not meant to be really, that's why I was a little hesitant to let anybody come in and comment. I really wanted it to be more of an informational presentation because there are several people who can say a lot of things, including Professor Göçek. So I'm sorry if not everybody got to comment, but please, if you can reach out to any one of the people that you saw here, you can also ask me and I can give you other emails if you so choose. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Emina. Thank you, Jud. Thank you, Kaspar and Arto, and thank you, Professor Müge Göçek. It was extremely, extremely helpful to have you. And maybe, who knows, with some luck, next time we will have a non-Zoom meeting. I don't know, maybe that will happen, but the benefit of this is I can have 3 time zones on my screen. And how lucky am I? How lucky are we, right? Thank you so much, everybody.
And thank you, Gonca, for putting this together for the past, the present, everybody in it. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.